So hopefully now everybody can see some slides along with seeing me. And one of the things I want to just highlight to you as I begin talking about this is the art of pitching. The reason I call the course the art of pitching with a little bit of emphasis on the word art is because, like any true art form, when it comes to pitching, there has to be personality, there has to be individuality. It's that same artistic expressiveness that we would find in the art forms has to come through in terms of when you're pitching as well. The people that you're pitching to, the investors that you hope will partner with you and join you in the idea that you are working with, you want them to have some sense of you as a person or you as a team, whoever it is that comprises the interaction that you have with those investors. Just like Picasso, Stephen King, my favorite rock band, U2, Frank Lloyd Wright, all of these artists have personality that comes through in terms of their work. And so similarly, in pitches, that's what you're after as well. And so in relation to that then, since I mentioned Picasso, one of the things Picasso said is this: learn the rules like a pro so that you can break them like an artist. And I love this quote because yes, in any art form, there are rules. You need to understand the rules. The really great artists are those who understand those rules and then modify, adjust them, let their personality come through as they work with those rules. And we end up with people like Picasso as a result of that. And so out of that then, in today's presentation, what I'm going to share with you next, if you really can't remember anything else I say today, if everything else goes out the window, is forgotten, you can't recall, what I'm going to share with you next is probably going to be the heart of successful pitching. And I can reduce everything that I'm going to be talking about down to just this one word. And that one word is storytelling. You've got to be able to put together a story that's compelling, a story that gets investors excited. And when you think about putting together a pitch, this is really the heart and the essence of a pitch, is that you've got this story that gets people naturally excited as you're telling that story, as they're hearing that story from you. They are continually with you, getting excited about your idea just as much as you are. And so the overriding factor in everything you do when you're shaping and designing a pitch for an audience is this idea of telling the story. This comes through in the slide deck, how you put your slides together. Those slides should help you tell that story. And of course, it comes through as you are the one in the seat of delivering and bringing across that message. That sense of story has to be there. You have to get us excited about the story. If you have an idea and people's reaction to it is one that they're not getting excited about it, then you need to work hard at discovering what is it about this story that is exciting and begin to feature those parts of it. So in relation to doing that then, what else we need to think about here then is what investors want to hear. They don't want you telling them these things directly, but their sense from you as you're in the process of presenting, as you're in the process of pitching, is they get a very clear sense of your credibility as a team or as individuals in that team. They get this sense of likability that, hey, this is a person I feel like I could work together with, that there is an authenticity that comes through. There's a likability factor that's there. It's going to be incredibly important that these will be features of how you tell that story, that this is the, in a sense, the resonance that comes through as you're presenting your idea to whoever your audience might be at that particular time. What I'd like to do here is just share with you a few examples of people I consider to be incredible storytellers, really, really good at doing this. Not sure how many of these you would have heard of before. If you haven't heard of them, I encourage you to go Google them, find out more about them online, get a sense of who they are. Scott Harrison, probably one of the best storytellers out there currently. Is in his early 30s, I believe now. He's been doing this for maybe 10 years. And before that, he was a nightclub promoter, interestingly enough, in New York City for 10 years. Woke up one day and decided that his life was a little bit empty and meaningless. And he began to put together a whole new venture for his life. And that related to making sure that everyone in the world could have clean drinking water. And how he approached it was to do it as a nonprofit, as a charity organization. But he reinvented the entire charity model. You'll find that many charities today are actually following some of the principles that he's put into place to tell his story and to get his charity to be credible with donors, with people who want to get involved in contributing to it. Incredibly successful, a very exciting story, and one worth paying some attention to. Another one you guys may have heard of, not heard of, Boyan Slotz, comes from the Netherlands. He's born in 1994. He gave a TED Talk at the age of 18 that really got some attention from people. When you watch that TED Talk, you'll find he's not the most eloquent, confident deliverer of a message, but that he definitely had this excitement about his story, and the story was creating a lot of excitement in his audience that day. And since then, a very audacious idea. Basically, it's just that he was developing a system for cleaning up plastic out of the ocean. And many of you have heard of the whirlpool that's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, this huge whirlpool of plastic. And his idea is just, let's get out there and clean it up. And his plan at the time was to do it in 5 years. You follow his story, he's got new iterations of that story, has been very successful. I think he's around 23, 24 years old now. But another one of these individuals who generates a lot of excitement in investors, gets them excited about his story, and then is actually delivering on what he's aiming to do. Another one that's a little bit closer to home for me, I lived for 30 years in Singapore. I moved to Rochester a year and a half ago. And when I was in Singapore at a business school there, Kuldeep Duggal was in the same business school. And he was a finance major as an undergraduate. Did eight or 10 years of corporate finance in Singapore before he ended up moving back home to his native country of India and starting a company known as T-Box. And again, Kuldeep has this incredible story to tell, and he has this natural way of getting everybody excited about his story, because his story is one where he's moving into the tea industry, an industry that's not really changed for 200 years. And he's a disruptor in that industry. And he's doing tea in a completely different way. Freshness. He's taken an industry that typically delivers tea 3 to 6 months after it's been picked. He's getting it into the hands of customers within 48 hours. And so he's changed that industry. When he was in Singapore, he would once in a while drop in on my classes and talk with us. I had him join our class on Tuesday virtually. And he's again stirred, I could tell among the students, stirred an excitement in them about an idea they probably never really thought about, tea and everything that goes with tea. And he has that way of storytelling. So those are some of my favorite examples. I would encourage you to check those out. They have videos, things you can learn about them and how they're going about telling the story. But what I'd like to share with you at this point in time is that when it comes to the pitch and how you put it together, Maya Angelou said it very well. She said, I've learned that people will forget what you said. They'll forget even what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that same spirit is true in a pitch. At the end of it, when you're finished speaking, what is the reaction of the investor to you and to your idea? What you want more than anything else is for that investor, by the time that presentation ends, you want that investor wondering, thinking, why are we not already partnered with this team, with this person? Why are we not already doing this? This is the level of excitement you want to instill in your investors. And you do this by the way in which you tell the story of your pitch, your company, your idea, whatever it is that you're working on. So one of the things you need to think about when you put together a pitch, how you're starting and how you're communicating value to an investor. The investor has agreed to spend time with you, to listen to you share this idea. But if they're not hearing within 2 to 3 minutes value, something about your idea that gets them excited, you're going to lose them. Maybe it's 2 to 3 minutes is too generous. Maybe it's just 1 to 2 minutes, really. But very soon, as you go into that pitch, you've got to generate that excitement within the investor. Now, not every idea clicks with every investor, so that's a different issue. But when you're talking about your idea, someone somewhere should feel excitement about that idea. It should resonate with them, and that's what you're aiming for. And that process then is really picking out of everything you could possibly say in relation to the idea you have. What is it that's most helpful, impressive, and relevant to you making your case? And so that's what I want to spend a little bit of time on here next, is just looking at the actual content of a pitch, how you shape it, how you put it together, and so that it really has the impact that you want it to have. And in some ways, it's pretty simple, it's pretty basic. Especially when you're starting out, you're new to pitching, there's almost what we could call a formula to how you put together the pitch, the structure to the pitch. It's pretty much predictable, routine. Nobody will be surprised at it. And it's simply this. It's what we call the 4-point pitch formula. So there are 4 points you want to highlight in terms of the content of that pitch. And so what you're after here is these 4 things: the problem, the solution, the market, and the business. What's the problem that you're addressing? What pain are people feeling because of this problem? And then how does your solution solve that pain or solve that problem that these individuals are facing? Of course, your market, who's interested in this, who really wants a product like this? And then of course, business relates to how are you generating revenue? How are you making money from this idea? What is it that you need from the investor in order to realize this? That all comes into that part of it. So 4 things, if those of you that are working on the New York business plan competition and you look at that slide deck, you'll notice that that slide deck has these 4 things in it in the exact same order. And what I want to emphasize here is that the order is critical. And so don't make the pitch more complicated than it needs to be. It's like those of you that know the game of baseball. If you're standing up at home plate and that ball is about to come across the plate and you actually connect the bat and the ball connect and the ball goes where it's supposed to go, where do you go? You head to first base, then second base, then third base, and then home. And it's exactly the same in a pitch. You don't mix that up. You don't head to third base first. You start with the problem. Then you go to the solution, talk about the market, and then the business model, the business idea. How are you going to generate revenue from this idea that you have? So what I'll do next here in terms of the things that I'd like to cover with you is just run through some of the things that relate to each of these ideas. Again, normally I would spend a fair amount of time, class time, dwelling on each of these. I'm just going to introduce these to you here, and hopefully you'll get the idea of some of the key things investors are looking for in relation to each of these areas. So one of the things is what we call this unique value proposition. That's part of your story. It's something you can say in 1, maybe 2 sentences. What is it about you that sets you apart from anybody else that's doing something similar? So take a look. Here's YouTube's unique value proposition. This is from some years ago, so please understand this is when they were first starting out in business. Their UVP, a platform where you can create, connect, and discover the world's videos. We hear that today and we think, that sounds pretty ordinary. What's special? But at the time, nobody was doing anything like this. Nobody had the capability. Nobody was in this space. And this is where YouTube got their start. And they understood that they wanted to create this platform where people could share videos, they could connect with one another, they could watch any number of videos. And it was a revolutionary idea at the time. The idea that you have, can you tell it to an investor in 1 or 2 sentences. If you don't have your idea worked out that well, you need to work on this. You need to get it down to 1 or 2 sentences. What is your unique value proposition? One example I think of that, it's maybe, you guys maybe can answer this better than I can, but I was thinking the other day about Uber and then Lyft. We have 2 companies. Is there a unique value proposition of one over the other? I think as a customer, my experience of them is I really can't quite tell the difference between them. But as companies, they've got to be able to distinguish themselves, and I'm sure that they can distinguish themselves from each other. But this is what the unique value proposition is all about. Communicating with an investor where that investor can see how you're different, unique, separate, able to do something that nobody else is able to do. We got to get that coming through. That's a very key part of what you're putting together in terms of a pitch. Okay, and just to reiterate that, venture capitalist Reid Hoffman said, if you can't articulate your competitive advantage in a simple way, it just simply means you don't have one. And you've got to work at this. You've got to get that in place and make sure that it's happening the way that you'd want it to. Okay, so with that then, I'd like to mention something else in relation to the problem and the solution. How you're putting together an understanding of the problem that everybody's facing. We'll understand kind of the size, the impact, how many people are experiencing this as a problem, and then of course your solution. And one of the things about problem and solution as you put together your pitch is really much more helpful. It works much better for you if you can somehow show us the solution. Sometimes you show us by a demonstration versus just telling us about a solution. One of the mistakes many people make when pitching is they get caught up in talking about the features of a solution. What we really want to understand are the benefits of the solution. We want to understand how life is going to be different for people now that they have this solution, now that they have access to this solution. We should see a contrast between how things were for them and how things will be for them because of your solution. And the more you can show us that, the more that we can see that, the more that it will stick in our memory, it'll register with us. One of the masters of this, by the way, I'm guessing most of you have heard this name before, Steve Jobs, Apple. And he was truly, many people described him as a showman. He did this so well. What I've got here is links to when he did the Mac back in the 80s. When he introduced that, he literally put on a bow tie and he came on stage much like he was a magician. And he set the Mac up and plugged it in right in front of everybody. And the thing started doing what it was supposed to do all on its own. And he showed us what the machine could do. iPod, he had it in his pocket. It was a deck, same size as a deck of cards. You could carry around all your favorite songs. Probably the moment you guys may be more familiar with is iPhone 2007. That particular presentation that Jobs did was about an hour long. But if you just watch the first 5 minutes, within the first 5 minutes of bringing up this whole new idea of the iPhone, something nobody had ever touched or experienced before, this device, again, which he pulled out of his pocket and showed us what it was about, that first 5 minutes, everyone wanted one. And as you know, history later was that people would fly to the United States from around the world. People stood in line trying to get their hands on this product. And it was simply because he had generated such excitement for something that nobody even realized they needed before. And he was very good at doing this kind of thing. So when it comes to the problem and the solution, try to show it to us. Help us understand the benefits, the difference it will make to have this product in people's hands, in the customer's hands, the people that are going to use it. So with that then, I'd like to talk a little bit about market. So we've talked about problem and solution. Then when it comes to the market, there are other things that we need to think about. And this is where I find that in pitches, my experience with students is that oftentimes getting the problem and the solution to work the way it needs to, they can do that pretty well because they've really lived it. They really thought about how they're solving a problem, and they've understood the characteristics and the solution. They understand that very well. So articulating it, they tend to be able to do that fairly well. Where it gets into problem is with the market. How do you help the investor understand who actually wants this thing? Who will make use of it? How do you bring this across that your investor can get excited about how much potential there is with this solution that you have, whether it's a service, whether it's a product, whatever it is that you have in mind. So a few tricks of the trade here. One, when you're describing that market, common mistake is to speak too generally about the market. We seem to have this feeling we don't want to leave anybody out of the market. We need to include everybody. No, actually, if you can just identify one segment of your market and help us understand that one segment of the market and how many there are like that, that's a great starting point. Of course, as an investor, then I might be able to see like, okay, how might others also be interested or attracted to this? But you want to focus on one specific segment of the market if possible. Identify what age category are these people typically in? Is there a particular gender that this appeals to more than others? Lifestyle, daily activities. One of the companies I got to interact with over the years was Lego in Denmark. And one of the things about their marketing that they were very sure about is that they were looking at boys who were from the ages of 6 to 12 years old. And this was, obviously there are others in that market, but they focused on designing and shaping toys for kids who were boys 6 to 12 years old, because that's who they were. Of course, the United States is a huge market for them. Another country that was a huge market for them is Germany, more so than any other places. So they had very specific markets in mind. And so when it came to creating new products and new ideas for those markets, because they understood their markets, they could be successful in terms of creating things. So similarly, for the idea that you're working on, there's a certain group of people that it's most suitable for, that it most fits in with. Help your investor understand this. So another idea is create a day in the life of. What this means is actually come up with a person's name. Use a name, say Michael. And so here's Michael, he's getting his car at 7 in the morning, here's his experience, whatever. And so help us see what that person's life is like and how your idea fits into that person's life. That's another strategy for helping the investor get excited about the market that you have. And then of course, we need to understand some numbers. We need to understand how many Michaels are there out there? How many are in that same category? Because this is how the investor understands you're going to have high return on your idea. And again, generating excitement in that investor as you go. So with that, the other thing is, of all those customers that could potentially be users of your idea, who are your customers now? Who can you reach now? Who are the low-hanging fruits, so to speak? Who are the ones that are most likely to jump on board with you in terms of doing this idea early on? And you start with those, and then you go from there. Facebook, for example. Facebook didn't target the whole world when it started out. Facebook started at Harvard. The first market for Facebook was simply other Harvard students. Then it moved to Ivy League universities, and then only after that, other universities, and then it moved to the families of students. It was a progression. And so again, investors are not expecting you to speak generally about this. They'll be able to figure out who else might want this, but you need to target your market specifically. And then a couple other things here. When you think of the investor, you think of putting together your pitch. What is it that investors really want to know as they're listening to you? So another key thing to make sure that you include in your pitch, especially if your company's already in existence, if it's already had some experiences with customers, we want to understand traction. We want to understand who already is using what you have, Who are the first ones that are on board with you? How many of those are there? We also want to understand, are you a low risk, high return financial opportunity? As they're listening to your idea, they're sitting there judging how safe it will be for them to go into business with you, to partner with you. You've got to be coming across talking about how the risk factors are low, the return factors are high in relation to the opportunity for them. The clearer this is, the more you get this across to your investor, obviously the more excited they will be. And then, of course, as they're getting familiar with you and the team that you're part of, is that the question they're wondering is, do you actually have the capability to go after the market? Are you the right team? Are you the right people? Can you actually deliver on what it is that you're going after? So in the beginning, I mentioned the word credibility. One of the things that the investors are sizing you up on is credibility. So the more experience you have with your idea, the more you've lived it, breathed it, worked with it, experienced it, all those things help the investor have the confidence that you can actually make this happen. Have you done things in the past? Do you have a track record? Have you started other companies? Have you worked with other ideas? All those things have to come into play here in terms of helping us understand, can you actually do what you're saying you're able to do? So that's taken us through problem, solution, market. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the business side of things. So here is, what's your plan? How is it that you're actually going to capture that market? How are you going to get people to actually put their money down in relation to the idea that you have? So there are two parts to this. One is what we call the go-to-market strategy. And of course, secondly, is your revenue model. There are two things that we want to understand about this. So what's your strategy for getting the attention of the market? And then what's your revenue model? Have you guys heard of a company called Zoom? I'm guessing you have. It's probably a great company right now to have stock in if you don't already. Maybe it's too late for them compared to others right now. But Zoom was started in 2011 by a Chinese national by the name of Eric Yan. And he had this startup idea of video conferencing. And what he wanted to do is he wanted to enable 15 people to video conference together. That was the maximum number at the time. And so his idea for go-to-market strategy and revenue model, basically what he came up with was a subscription model. And there were different types of subscriptions. One was called the basic subscription, which meant that it was free. You didn't have to pay any money for it. You could meet with 15 people for up to 40 minutes, and anybody who wanted it could do it. Why did he do that? Why did he offer it for free to people as long as but he put a limit on time and how many? Well, it's simply because people getting familiar with it, getting used to using it, they'll start to be familiar with the technology. It was new technology at the time. And that's how you get the foot in the door with people. If you get them experiencing it, they have the experience up to a certain point, then companies look at it like, wait, 40-minute meetings, that's not long enough. So then they're willing to pay for a subscription to have it. And so that's where the subscription model, and you have premium, I don't know how many different subscription models he actually has, but that was his strategy. And of course, then the revenue came from the subscriptions. The technology also improved. Went in 2013, I guess you could do 25 participants instead of 15. Then fairly quickly it became 100 and 1,000. Now the rest is history. I was in a webinar last week with 5,000 participants on Zoom. And yeah, it's amazing. And of course, you know the rest of the story. It's no problem today convincing anybody it's a great idea. But at the time, it was a new idea. But he understood that he had to figure out the revenue model and his go-to-market strategy for that. So that's what you see happening there. So then, A couple other things about that go-to-market strategy is we want to understand how will you get customers, but we also understand how will you keep them? How will you grow that number of customers? How will you expand? So one of the things about business which investors will understand is that winning a customer, getting a first-time customer, the costs are typically 10 times more than retaining customers. So it's not enough to just stand in front of an investor and say, we're going to be able to gain customers, we're going to be able to acquire customers. They want to also understand, how are you going to keep them? How are you going to retain them? How are you going to have people coming back? What are they going to do more? So a couple examples in relation to this. Frequent flyer program. Airlines use this. Why do they have frequent flyer programs? It's simply because they know it costs less to retain customers than it does to win them for the first time. And so this is why they have a frequent flyer program. That was one of the answers to how you retain them. Another example, maybe you guys are familiar with this one, Dropbox. Everybody wants more Dropbox space. And so Dropbox came up with a referral model where if you got a friend to sign up for Dropbox, you would end up with more space in your own Dropbox. And so this was another strategy for not only keeping customers, but it was also a way to grow customers, was through getting your friends to sign up for it as well. Typically, university students, high school students, this was very popular to do once Dropbox was first getting started. So these are some examples of how you would do this. And a couple other things I want to mention in relation to the revenue model. And that is another mistake that happens sometimes, especially when we're in the early stages of working with an idea, is we try to have more than one revenue stream. And maybe you do, but in a pitch, just focus on the primary one. Choose one and use that to talk about. You don't need to bring up all the other possible revenue streams. If it comes up in the Q&A, of course, then yes, you should be able to talk about it and explain, etc. But for the purpose of the pitch, pick one as your primary and work with that. Reduces the potential for confusion and for questioning. So try to keep that in mind. Another thing is that it should be a plan, a model that you actually feel very comfortable with, one that you believe in, one that suits who you are as a company, your ethos, your values as a company, not just something that, well, maybe we know this investor and this investor likes this. No, again, authenticity is so important. You've got to be true to yourselves first and primary, and you'll find investors who embrace who you are. And that's the approach that you want to take. But this is hard in the beginning because you're so desperate for that funding. And so the temptation is to adjust and change when it may not be who you are. And then, of course, as you're talking about the ideas, one of the faults that I find with slide decks and so forth is way too much information's crammed into a slide. And when you're presenting to an investor, again, we're after the feeling, the sense of, wow, this is so exciting. So try to keep your financial information really simple. A tip for doing this is have backup slides, have additional slides, so that if during the Q&A an investor is really interested in more the minute details, you can flip to that slide during the Q&A, but don't show it during the pitch. Keep it really simple during the pitch itself in terms of how much financial information you go into. We just want to get the sense of the potential of the idea. So all that to say, when it comes to the problem, the solution, the market, and the business, everything you bring up, every point that you make has to fit the purpose of influencing your investor. Every fact, every feature, every anecdote. If it doesn't help you influence that investor, getting them excited about it, get rid of it. It may be a great story, but that's for another day. Don't use that particular anecdote if it doesn't fit precisely what you're trying to accomplish in that pitch. And so that's where it's, again, when you talk about different ideas, you've got to be ruthless in terms of throwing out the stuff that doesn't help you get where you want to go, and it doesn't add value to that particular piece. So with that, then, what I'd like to do is just remind you of this. when the investor, at the end of the day, weighing and assessing, does he want to get involved with you guys? He's got to understand low risk, high return, that this is an idea that has incredible potential and it can be delivered relatively easily. Those are the features and factors that he would like to get a sense of. So that's, again, very, very quickly what I want to say in relation to the content of the presentation. I'd also like to just hit a little bit on slides before we wrap up here. And what I'd like to do is just hit you again with some just quick tips on what you might want to think about when you're putting together slides. The slides that I'm showing you today are not necessarily ones that you'd want to put into a pitch. These are educational purpose slides. You'll notice I have a lot of text in my slides. This is not the way to do slides for a pitch. So what I'd like to hit you with on this is certain things that you got to make sure that you do, especially if you're working as a team and putting slides together. Be consistent about your font sizes and your colors, the look and the feel of those slides, incredibly important. Avoid animation. You know, you've seen those people do fancy things where zoom in, zoom out, it comes in rowing all over the place. And no, there's no need for all of that in terms of a slide deck for this kind of pitch. It's really about you generating excitement in the investor. Your slides simply enhance what you're doing. So watch out for animation doing the fancy stuff. It doesn't necessarily help you make your point. And then there's something that I call the 3-second rule. And that is, a person should be able to look at your slide and understand what that slide means in 3 seconds or less. If it takes your audience longer than that, it's not a good slide. It's too complicated. The slide deck, the slides that we're looking at should help us understand what you are saying as an individual. So the 3-second rule. When you're putting together a slide deck, test. See, does it actually work the way it is? In January, I had the chance to attend the hardware challenge at NextCore, and there were about 20 different pitches that were being brought across that particular day. And as I was sitting in the audience, I actually pulled out my phone and took a couple pictures of some of the slides that were showing up. So I want to show you a few examples of slides here and talk about a couple things in relation to that. One of the things you'll notice, though, is that there's actually a bald head in the picture. And you may be wondering, why is that bald head in all these pictures? Well, the individual is sitting in front of me, and I couldn't quite get my camera high enough to take the picture without getting his head in there. So that just explains what's there. But take a look at this slide that I'm going to show you. Think about the 3-second rule. How long would it take you to actually know what this slide's about? One of the things we get right away is, okay, important points, and we hit that. And then you see how much text there is, and think about how long it takes you to read each of those lines of text. These are the bullet points. This is all too common, all too typical, unfortunately, in slide design and pitch slides used in pitches, but very ineffective. And this is what I call the teleprompter slide. This is really, it's not meant for the audience, it's meant for the speaker to read to the audience, to remember what he or she wants to say as she's presenting. The slides like this are of no help to the audience. So don't give your audience slides like this. Change how you do it. I'll give you the alternative view to this. So here's one. This was a social entrepreneurship pitch done by a group of students. And their idea was pretty simple. What they were proposing to, in this case, they were presenting to a company, and they were asking the company to donate all their used, leftover, no longer able to be used desktops. And they were collecting those desktops from the company and then shipping them to Africa, refurbishing them, getting them all cleaned up, ready to be used in classrooms in schools in Africa where students had no access to desktops and the technology, so that these students could actually get on the internet and further their education. And so the whole idea behind this was just give us your used stuff that you no longer want. let us ship it where it will be useful to others. You see the impact that a picture can have in helping you remember the story that they were telling. You see those desktops sitting on a pallet, being ready to be shipped, ready to go, and then they're making a difference. So this was the idea. This is the kind of the thing you want to do with your slides. Have those slides designed to help you tell your story. And a couple other things I want to mention very quickly about slides. Again, one of the things that's fascinating to me is this issue of the last slide. And when you think about the last slide, typically the last slide that you have stays up the longest. It usually stays up through the entire Q&A. And so it's in the background as you're answering questions, your audience is continually looking at the slide. But do you know what slide I see more often than any other as being the last slide? Very, very fascinating to me. And this again happened as we were at the hardware challenge that day. But what you want to do is you want to display audience value in that last slide. You want to remind us of the brilliance, the wonder of your idea. But all too often, the kind of slides I see are slides like this. I'm sure you could give me a show of hands real quickly and say, yeah, we've all seen slides like this. Why do people do this? Maybe you've done it. I hope you haven't, but don't do it. There's no need for a thank you slide. There's no need for a question slide. Why is that? Because you're there. You can say thank you to your audience. You can let your audience know that, okay, I'd welcome any questions from you now. You don't need to show us this. What you need to do, and here, I'll show you one other one that happened that same day that really was meant to communicate, wow, how excited everybody was about the idea just presented by showing us a picture of how everybody else seemed to be excited about it. And then do we have questions? Well, it's actually not helpful, but when it's up for 10 minutes, it actually, I think, gets annoying. It doesn't help us remember anything about what you're actually there to do. So here's an example of a slide that works really well for this purpose. So this particular team had talked about something that individuals in nursing homes, elderly care homes, would be able to use to help them remember to drink water during the day. Because one of the things that was happening with elderly people was they weren't getting enough drinking water. Hydration was an issue for them. This particular vessel meant to hold water, so the nursing staff would fill it up with water in the morning, and then throughout the day they would know how much water each patient was actually getting in terms of staying hydrated. And so it was designed for this purpose. So the whole time that they're answering questions about their idea, their product, and so forth, here they have this picture reminding us of this incredibly brilliant idea that's going to be so helpful to those who are taking care of people who are elderly. And even the elderly themselves can use this to help them remember how much water they've been drinking during the day. So the brilliance of the idea, the whole time the Q&A is on, here we have it. Here's the idea. Okay, so in relation to that then, what I'd like to do is just one more point here. So absolutely crucial to success when it comes to pitching. Robert Levine said this: if you could master just one element of personal communication that's more important than anything else, it's the quality of being likable. If your audience likes you, they'll forgive just about everything you do wrong. This is great comfort when you're in a pitch. If they don't like you, it doesn't matter how many things you get right, it simply won't matter. And so likability is another one of those things. And so you got to figure out, as a presenter, as a speaker, how do you bring across likability? So let me wrap up here. Just a reminder, way back at the beginning, I mentioned this: more important than anything else is this idea of storytelling. Telling a story that gets the investor excited in relation to what it is that you want to do. You conveying credibility and likability through the way in which you talk about your idea and the points in which you make about that particular idea. And that's going to get to the point where you can actually put together a pitch that satisfies what it is the investor is looking for from you, and where you can have impact as an artist as well, through your personality coming through you expressing who you are as an individual in relation to the idea that you have. So that concludes what I'd like to bring across in terms of this, and I'd be very glad to ask questions. There are certain things I just didn't have time to cover. For example, delivery is one of those things that we could talk about, and how do you do a virtual pitch instead of a live in-person kind of pitch and so forth. And so I think what I'll do here is, just so that I can see you guys a little bit better, I'm going to stop the share screen for the moment. And then if you guys want to just put your videos on and so forth, and then I can see who's here. And then I guess if there are questions that people have, maybe Matthew, you can help me kind of keep track of who's asking questions and who's bringing them up first. Thanks.
All right, so if you guys have a question, feel free to use the raise your hand feature of Zoom, or you could also drop it into the chat bar. I'll be monitoring both. Any questions from anyone? All right, Tom, looks like we got one from Bhuvish. How many words in a slide? More visuals or words?
Okay, yeah, good question. Always as few words as possible. That's my recommendation. One of the things that you do when you're creating a slide and putting it together is just asking yourself, everything that's on that slide, does it need to be there? Is there a way that I can do with less rather than more? Visuals, always, if they're relevant and they're appropriate and they fit in with what you're talking about. A photo has such impact because it's about this idea of pathos, feeling. And so a slide deck should create a certain feeling. I mentioned to you the 2007 iPhone presentation that Steve Jobs did. If you guys take time to look at that, one of the things you'll notice about the way those slides are designed is that incredibly few words, incredibly visual in terms of the experience of those slides and making impact. He does what he calls a business 101 graph towards I think about the 4th minute into his talk. And what that does is it positions in the audience's mind very beautifully how his iPhone is so remarkably better than anything else that was out there on the market currently as they knew it. And he had such impact. An incredibly simple XY graph made the point beautifully, and the message was driven home. And your audience, without even realizing it, were convinced that whatever it was that this iPhone thing was that he was holding up, it was going to be fantastic. So that's what you want to be after in terms of your slides. So yes, as few words as possible. I mentioned the 3-second rule. So you design them so very quickly I see what that slide is saying in relation to what I hear you saying as an individual. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Tom, looks like we got one from Carter. How do we show, not tell, for a narrated presentation?
Okay, Carter, was it?
Yep.
Can you help me understand what you mean by the word narrated presentation? Just have to unmute.
Yeah, so for some of our presentations now with this, coronavirus outbreak, they are having to be narrated, and we're not able to do a video. So, like for example, at my school, our presentation needs to be narrated. Is there any way that we can make it more visual, I guess, with our words?
Okay, so you mean narrated by you're reading a script, talking about the idea?
Yeah, talking about the idea and talking about our slides, kind of like yes, through like a script.
Okay. Well, there are a few things that come to mind. I think a couple things about it. I've been watching David Attenborough do his Our Planet shows recently, and he's amazing as a narrator. So one thing about if you're in the role of narrating, you're reading something to an audience, of course, still bringing in a level of expressiveness in relation to how you're talking about the idea. So if that's what you're having to do, is to read some kind of script to someone, then of course there's all the delivery aspects to doing that. But otherwise, you're talking about the slides and how they would help you show something, or you're talking about how you as a speaker would show it. So if you're talking about as a speaker showing it, I don't know if there's an element of being able to use a video in relation to presenting the idea, but this is something that I found that, you know, obviously a demonstration of the idea. So if you want to check this out, Enigma, a company that was doing capturing of data and using Google to do that, did a fantastic presentation at TEDCrunch. I can't remember the year now, maybe 2013 or so, but just look that up, Enigma. And they did a live demo in front of an audience, which is always risky because when you're doing a live demo, it can go wrong. But the alternative to a live demo is just to do a video recording. And so I don't know if that's a possibility that you can insert into whatever time you're given to pitch an idea. But then we can watch the video and see the demo that way. And of course, with the video, you can guarantee that it does work the way it's supposed to as you're doing the demonstration of the idea. So I'm not sure, Carter, if that's helping to answer the question that you had specifically. Hopefully that gives you some idea.
Yeah, it feels like a video is kind of our only option at this point. But
yeah, I mean, like if I have an object and it's small enough that I can have it in the camera and people can easily see it, could possibly work. It depends on what you're doing. But there are other things that no, even this wouldn't be clear enough. I wouldn't be able to get the idea from it. So that's why you kind of have to assess how best do we understand it. Or can you not necessarily demo it, but you can illustrate it to us in a different way. And then whether you can put that into the slide. So the step process or whatever, I don't know. It seems like there's a bunch of different ways you could possibly do it, but it would probably have to relate to a specific idea that you have. And I'd be welcome, you know, if you want to interact more on your particular case, we could do that outside of this as well. So you can just let me know.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Tom, looks like we got about 5 more questions, and I do want to be respectful of Tom's time and everyone's time as we've reached 1:30. So with Tom, if you're all right, we'll answer the 5 remaining questions.
I'm fine. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. So we have V2. This question is their question: how do you show and not tell when a prototype of your product is not ready to be presented?
Or when you don't have a working prototype and so forth, yes. I remember one company I interacted in Sweden, and they did not have a working prototype. They had absolutely no certainty that this idea that they had would actually work, but they rigged it up so that it seemed like it would, which was all they needed to do to convince that investor. And in their case, they did do a video of it and somehow gave the impression, again, it related to back in the days before we had touchscreen technology. They were talking about this idea of using your finger to move along and do touchscreen. And but they didn't have a working prototype. Of course, they didn't have the budget that Apple did and so forth, which could come up with it. But they faked it and got the investment and eventually sold the idea for a few $1 million to somebody else. So they did all right. I don't know, is that answering the question? I forgot who had the question.
Yeah, that does the question. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Looks like our next question is from Theo. Theo asks, how important is it to mention your competitors while you're pitching?
Thank you for that question. It is important. I forgot to mention that in terms of the many things that I was trying to cover there. But yes, if you have competitors who are doing something very similar, it's really important for us to understand how you differentiate yourselves from them and what they have to offer. What are you bringing to the space that they can't, etc. Why can you do this and they're not able to do it? If you start doing this, are they likely to imitate? Will you still have an advantage over them? Sometimes it's the first comer into the space advantage. How quickly does that disappear? Those are all things that they'll want to understand in relation to the idea that you have. How easy is it to be imitated? How easy is it for others? Do you have the intellectual rights to the idea so that somebody else can't take it over, etc. So yeah, we need to understand who else is doing this. What are you bringing to the space that just makes you so different, worth investing in, etc. And how long will you have this advantage?
Great. Looks like our next question is from Ben. With regards to when a template is provided, how similar should the presentations be? The session here suggested different than what was provided in an example template. And Tom, if I can jump in, because I think I might know where this is coming from. Ben, if you're referring to the New York Business Plan competition, you will not be knocked or judged poorly at all for using a different template than what was provided. It's there just as an example, because oftentimes this is the first time a team might have put together a pitch deck, right? So it's just there as an example. I have seen many different types of slides presented for this competition over the past 5 years. But I will say each successful team that's won the competition and moved on have included the 4 main points that Tom presented today.
Yeah. And so maybe I can just do a quick screen share on that too, just so we can see what I'm talking about there, because that template is actually a good one. Let me see here. I just need to switch into that. Give me a second. Okay. See if I can get rid of this one. Okay, so this is the New York Business Plan competition and what they suggested in terms of slides. Now, what you should realize is the first 2 are not actually slides that you put in the deck. Here's where it actually starts. It's with your first slide being the company name and so forth. Then you'll notice here they suggest talking about the problem, the solution, the market, and of course the business model. There are a couple other things that they suggest that you bring in as well, and you're not limited to 1 slide for any of these either. So just understand that this is what they suggest. You talk about the problem first, then you go to the solution, then the market, and then of course the business model. So that is exactly what I was telling you as well. So I was glad to see that. Now, a couple other things, the competitive landscape that relates to the market and so forth that you're in, that also relates to revenue generating, so fine. The work plan was a little bit new to me because investors do want to understand the next 18 months very often. This one suggests, the Gantt chart suggests 3 years plan. So 3 years is a fairly long time nowadays. So much changes. I tend to favor an 18-month plan. Like, do you know what's going to happen for your company for the next 18 months? Most investors you're working with, well, they're helping you get through the next 18 months anyway. So this part here relates to the team. And for the purposes, again, depending on the type of investor you're interacting with, there are things they want to understand about your team. Again, remember I said, can you actually do what you're saying that you want to do? Can you deliver? Can you actually reach the market that you're claiming you can reach? We're trying to get a sense of your capabilities. So we need to understand your team and who they are, what they bring to that mix. So those are all things there. And then of course, you see here, they have the backup slides. So this is very much similar to what I was talking about in terms of how you approach this whole experience. And these are just things, again, just to think about in terms of that slide deck. People ask me how many slides. The fewer slides you have, the better overall, partly because there's just less to go wrong with fewer slides. So 10 to 15 maybe. If you have, I think for the business New York plan, you have 10 minutes to present. So that's a fairly generous amount of time versus 5 minutes or less. I mentioned to you getting your audience excited within a 1 to 2 to 3 minute period of time, getting them excited about the idea. Remember watching on Shark Tank, not exactly the place to go for pitches, but this 15-year-old girl was pitching her idea. Within a minute and a half, she practically had those sharks jumping out of their seats wanting to partner with her, the way she talked about the idea. It was something called bottle cap jewelry. I'd never heard of it before, absolutely of no interest to me. But those investors saw an opportunity for low risk, high return, and they were jumping out of the seats literally. So you put together your ideas and your points to cause that kind of impact. Your slides help you do that as well.
Well, it looks like our next question is from Melissa. Melissa asks, how do you address the likability when there may be stigma based on ethnicity or religion? And then Melissa references the quantitative data on how many Black women receive venture capital funding.
Oh yeah, no, just like anywhere else, there's discrimination all the time. And what's really neat though is that there are organizations out there that are trying to help women particularly, so I'm really glad to see that. We had, Matthew, you know who this is, they brought in a speaker to the Ein Center last year, very much so focused on helping women entrepreneurs have success and so forth. So those are the organizations to connect with and help get ideas from and so forth. But yeah, in any kind of a situation, investors are selective, just like all of us are. We want to work with certain people and we don't want to work with others. It's not right or wrong necessarily, but it's frustrating, especially when you have a great idea and you're trying to find that right person to partner with. But you have to remember it is a relationship, and you want to choose you also, not just an investor choosing you, but it's you choosing what kind of investor that you want to be partnered with. And so you need to understand their values. It's just like if you're getting hired by a company, you don't just join any company, you also want to join a company that matches who you are as an individual. And I look at pitching the same way, investor the same way, but it's not easy. That part I know. I lived in Singapore for 30 years. I worked in Malaysia. I started a business there. I was there for 3 years. I was a minority there. One of the criticisms about me at that time was that I did not speak the language of the country, the people in that country. And that made it very challenging. Just having the door shut on me, I was new to the country. There's no way that I could be fluent in the language. It was just, but you know, certain people just know who they want to be with and who they don't want to work with. And so that's what you find out when you're doing the pitching, is not everybody is going to open the door to you. Not everybody is going to be excited about the idea simply because you don't fit who they think they want to be working with.
Thank you for sharing your short story. I'll certainly follow up afterwards just to ask if there is such a thing as like a ghost pitcher, if it would make sense to hire someone.
Oh. Yeah.
Face of my company, but the face of the pitch.
Yes. And that's where, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. So yeah, I'd be glad to talk with you more on that, because yeah, I don't like the way the world is sometimes. Yeah, so it
requires us to strategize.
Yeah. There is one, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but there's another pitching competition that particularly features women and ideas that women have come up with, and I just wish I could remember the name of it, but it's really exciting. So there's other ways in which to find investors who are looking for people just like you. Yeah.
All right, our next question comes from Snigdha, who asks how to skillfully deal with unexpected or difficult questions after a pitch.
Okay, yes. And so that's where many of the things you think about is that you do as much preparation work as you possibly can beforehand. You do all the groundwork. You know your idea inside out. You know everything about it. You try to find out everything you can about those investors before you actually meet them, who they are, what pushes their buttons, what gets them excited, what kinds of investments have they made in the past, who are they currently connected to and working with. So those are all things that you do in relation to preparing for the questions. But then inevitably, there will be someone who throws you a question that seems to just come out of, wow, you know, I really wish I'd thought of that before, but honestly, I never have. I never even considered it before. Was that even, yes, now that you mention it, I can see why you would ask that question, but yeah. So I feel authenticity, just admitting that, okay, at this moment, I really don't have a good answer for you on that. What I will do is I will go back and look into this. And if you want to interact more on this, I'll get back to you on it. And so again, that approach of not being, what do you say, intimidated by the questions. And every once in a while, people just like to ask hard questions just to see what you're made of. They're in a sense testing you to see how you deal with either pressure or uncertainty, or like if you were actually in a decision-making role within the team, how would you do that? So sometimes it's helpful to even try to understand what's the purpose behind the question. What is it that they're actually looking for? Is it generally they want an upfront answer, a literal, straightforward answer to this, or is there something else that they're trying to understand about me? And the other thing about questions, one thing I've seen before is sometimes people, the question asked is either a simple yes or no question. But what the questioner is actually doing is they don't want you to just say yes or no. Sometimes they want you to actually elaborate or expand on it, help us understand more in relation to the idea. So again, watch out for that. If your tendency is to just say a few words, sometimes it's helpful to put more substance around what's being asked so they get a fuller idea. Again, questions aren't, how do I say this? Questions are meant to help. What you want to do is you want to use every question you're asked to help you sell the idea. So as someone answering the question, always try to bring it back to the main point. Here's the heart of our idea. Here's what excites us about our idea. Here's what motivates us. So even a question may seemingly be taking you off tangent or getting you off track on a tiny little point. See if you can bring it back to, but here's what's really cool about what we're doing. Here's what's really different about what we're trying to make happen. So bring it back to the heart of your message. That's how I would work with questions. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
All right, looks like our next question we have is from Siobhan, and Siobhan asked if you can provide with a hint for the judges of the competition we're looking for. Siobhan, are you referring to the New York Business Plan competition judges?
Yes, I'm referring to that.
Okay, so Tom, I can take this one. So there's a rubric online that we host on the Ain Center's website for the presentation round the judges will be using for when they score. But what they are looking for is how well you can defend your idea and how well you present basically the four main points that Tom has presented. Some of these people are investors in their private life, but that's, this is not an investment type pitch, right? There's no one going to be saying, here, I'm going to hand you money after you pitch them. This is to determine the top two teams to move on to the next round. So you need to make sure that you are prepared to be better than 95% of the teams pitching around you. And so how well can you convey your idea? How well can you talk authoritatively about what you're presenting? The judges that we have, and there's a number of them who've done this for a number of years, are very good at sniffing out BS, if I can be a little frank. So I think that's where, to Tom's point about being authentic and being humble enough to say, I don't know, but I will follow up. They will know if you're fumbling around to just say something for the sake of saying something. So reflect on the template, reflect on the lessons from this workshop, look at the rubric that we have posted online, and that'll give you a sense of what the judges are looking for.
Could I maybe just mention something in relation to virtual pitching as well? Since I have you here, I don't know how many of you are actually going to be doing a pitch soon, but let's see, Siobhan, is that right? Yeah, one thing that I noticed with yours is you have this moving animation behind you as you're a member of the audience here.
Mhm.
And absolutely fascinating. I love the Northern Lights. When you're actually in a pitching situation, you want to choose a setting where there's not stuff going on behind you and without a lot of clutter. And as you look at some of the others who have their videos on too, you'll notice lighting as an issue. And one of the things that you want to think about is how can you have lighting on yourself and not have lighting behind you as you're pitching. And so these are things. Another tip I was told, I'm sitting in a chair, but I'm sitting on the edge of the chair. I actually put a pillow on the chair to help me sit on the edge. So I'm sitting a little bit forward, and this helps you have the energy and the enthusiasm you need to have when you're in a pitching situation as well. It's another little trick. I don't know if there's any requirements on standing or sitting while you're pitching. I typically find it easier to stand in front of an audience and pitch. Today I chose to sit down. It's partly because the proximity of the camera to my face, and so that you can see my face more, so that's why I chose to do that. So these are all things you have to think about in planning when you're putting together the virtual pitch. And how do you want to come across to the judges? And so these are all just little things, but they help in terms of having that impact. The difference between video and being in a room with people is when we're in a room with people, we can pick up on an energy that's coming from there. And as a speaker, we can adjust our energy to the audience. I find that much harder to do in video. I can't quite see people's faces as clearly as I could if I was in the room with them. I can't quite get a sense of everything about them from the body language and so forth. So virtual pitching, even having a meeting virtually is different than being in the room with people. And so those are some things to be aware of, and then adjust those factors to how you actually interact and present to an audience as well. So it's good to give thought to all those kinds of things as you plan for the pitch.
Thank you.
All right, so we have two more questions. Another one from Snigdha, and then the last one will be from V2. So Snigdha asked, how do you pitch for the first round of investment needed for further R&D when all you have is just a product design?
Okay, yeah, when you're in the very early stages, you haven't even had a chance to try it out. So yeah. It partly depends to how much you're asking for at that point in time and how much there's to it. But I'd say that much of what I've told you today remains exactly the same. So obviously in the life of a product, there are different stages and so forth. Let's see, maybe I'll give you an example. Kuldeep Duggal, I mentioned to you T-Box, and because he was a student from a university in Singapore. In the beginning, what he had was an idea that he was, in a sense, going to be like Airbnb, or he was going to be like Uber, and that is that he didn't need to own tea plantations. He simply was having tea provided by the plantations. He was going to be the one who took their tea and then got it to the market. What he needed for that idea to get off the ground was he needed a website. He needed a way of people being able to do online shopping easily. He wanted to make sure that those people had fantastic customer experience. What was his unique value proposition? Freshness. Getting that tea as quickly as possible from the field to the customer. The other thing he did is he built refrigeration facility next to the plantation. So as soon as those leaves are picked, they were refrigerated. He put them in hermetically sealed bags, and the customer was getting very fresh tea. So this was his initial idea. What did he need from the investor in the beginning? Well, he needed to be able to pay for that web design, the packaging, the branding of the product and so forth, those kinds of things. The other thing he needed was the refrigeration facilities. So he started by just saying this was his idea. Now, the reaction he got, I think, from many people in the beginning is, first of all, like, there's so many players in tea. There's so many competitors. You have these huge names, Twinings, you have Lipton, you have all these people. What in the world are you trying to do going into the same space that everybody else is in? And that's where his UVP became so important in terms of doing that. So even if you have nothing in a sense to start with, you just really have an idea. It's again, being able to tell that story in a way that you're getting that investor excited about it. That's really, and that's why I say in some ways it doesn't change. What I told you today doesn't change. So can you tell us that story? The idea would be is if you can tell it compellingly, we can see how people would get excited, that they might actually want fresh tea. Does he have any evidence that people want fresh tea? If he does, he should use it. But if he doesn't, he has to just work with the story and compellingly convince us. And that's in a sense what he did in the beginning. Kashu will tell you that even his own family members were very skeptical of his idea in the beginning. And his family members had been in the tea business for decades. And he had resistance from his own family in relation to the idea. But that's where the belief in the idea and that it would actually become what it could, he made it work. Hopefully that helps.
All right, so our final question comes. Oh, sorry, Singta.
Oh, sorry.
We have one last question from V2, and it's about, should you pivot or continue with a business idea regardless of whether the pandemic has disrupted your industry?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by pivot. Whose question was that?
That was V2.
Hi, this is V2.
Hi, V2.
So my question is, so if you had a business idea that you were planning before the pandemic came by, and then the pandemic happened, of course, and things are stopped for a bit, and you're moving into a competition where you'll be judged on, I don't know, you'd be judged on certain criteria. So presenting an idea that was fitted for the world before we're living in now, is it still sustainable to do that, or just go with the flow and change your idea because of the pandemic?
Well, this is the thing that's interesting. Many times the ideas do change because the investor starts to get involved and has input in terms of how the idea actually takes shape as well. So that's one of the things that's interesting. It's a relationship with the investor, and there's that dynamic. Sometimes they can be mentors to you and help you understand how better to position your product or how better to work with it. But yes, you're right in one sense. The world is so different. I mean, what's happened in 2020, I think none of us could have imagined it in December of 2019 that our world would be so different today than how it's changed. So it partly relates to the idea. Does that idea have to be reworked or reshaped or rethought or whatever? Or maybe it just has to be thrown. I can't say. I would be glad to interact with you on that one-to-one as well, just in terms of the idea that you're thinking about, and see, are there ways to do this that it would fit this new world that we're entering into? One of the things that I get excited about, I tell my students about, is that, wow, we're in class together. Your students, who knows what 2021 is going to look like? That, there may be a need for all kinds of things we never imagined we needed before, just because of how this year is going to go. And so anybody who's entrepreneurially oriented, thinking through ideas that might work for that new world may be the way to go too. So B2, without really knowing what your idea is and what you had in mind before, you may find that, well, it's just a matter of just timing and waiting until things settle down and we have a little bit more certainty about how things are going to be going forward. Or it could be that the idea just lost its relevance because nothing will stay the same anymore. One of the things, I talked with someone who works at Strong yesterday, and they were talking about cardiology being done drive-through, where because they have to do blood tests, people stick their arms out the window, they draw the blood, and they're assessing how much medication this person needs to keep their hearts working the way that they're supposed to. And is that going to be a permanent change? Right now, it's hard for me to believe that it would be, but maybe we'll have drive-through clinics going forward. Who would have imagined? Yeah, so that's why, I don't know if I can give you a better answer than that.
Thank you very much.
All right. So I know we have one more question in the chat box, but I do actually have a 2 o'clock Zoom meeting. So as the host, I unfortunately need to end this meeting. With that, I want to sincerely thank Tom for his time presenting today. This was fantastic. Such wonderful tips and done very succinctly. And so I hope everyone here was able to take some tips and tricks away that they can apply to their upcoming competitions or future endeavors, because I can imagine these can be applied broadly, not just for startup competitions. So then once again, Tom, thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for being part of this.
Yeah, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was really amazing.